Picture it. The year is 1954. The television is broadcasting in glorious, eye-straining black and white. People are putting gelatin in their salads for reasons that still baffle modern scientists. And the American highway is essentially a parade of giant rolling steel bricks. But right in the middle of this era of sensible conformity, a vehicle emerged that looked like it had been dropped out of a UFO driven by a very stylish Italian alien. I am talking about the 1954 Plymouth Explorer, a car that had the body of a supermodel and the internal organs of a heavily sedated mule. But before we dive headfirst into this magnificent, confused masterpiece of mid-century automotive history, do me a massive favor. Smash that subscribe button, hit the like icon, and drop a comment below telling me what your absolute favorite weird concept car is. Your support keeps this channel running smoother than a perfectly tuned carburetor, and it takes zero effort on your part. Win-win. Now, to truly understand why the 1954 Plymouth Explorer is so hilarious and fascinating, you have to understand the absolute state of Plymouth in the early 1950s. Plymouth was Chrysler's entry-level brand. It was the sensible shoe of the automotive world. If Plymouth were a spice, it would be flour. If it were a beverage, it would be lukewarm tap water. Chrysler Corporation at the time was ruled by a man named K.T. Keller. Keller was a brilliant engineer, but he had a very specific, incredibly stubborn philosophy about car design. He believed that a gentleman should be able to sit in his car while wearing a fedora without the hat touching the roof. I am not making this up. As a result, Plymouths in the early 50s looked like motorized telephone booths. They were tall, boxy, upright, and had all the aerodynamic properties of a deeply depressed refrigerator. Consumers, surprisingly enough, were getting a little tired of driving cars that looked like they were designed by an architect specializing in brutalist office buildings. Sales were slipping. General Motors and Ford were starting to make cars that actually looked cool, and Plymouth was desperately holding on to the fedora demographic. Enter Virgil Exner. Virgil Exner was Chrysler's new design chief, and he was the absolute antithesis of K.T. Keller. Exner loved swoops. He loved fins. He loved cars that looked like they were moving 100 miles an hour while parallel parked. Exner looked at the Plymouth lineup, presumably wept a single tear of profound sorrow, and decided it was time to stage a design revolution. He called it a forward look. But Exner knew he couldn't just spring a spaceship on the Chrysler board of directors all at once. They would have clutched their pearls and fired him on the spot. He needed to ease them into the future. He needed a dream car, a concept vehicle built specifically to gauge public reaction and prove to the bean counters in Detroit that sex appeal actually sells. But there was a problem. If Exner tried to build this radical concept car in Detroit, the corporate executives would constantly be looking over their shoulder, asking why the roof was so low and where a man was supposed to put his bowler hat. So, Exner did what any genius with a corporate credit card would do. He outsourced it to Italy. He teamed up with Carrozzeria Ghia, a legendary coach-building firm in Turin. The plan was wonderfully devious. Chrysler would build the chassis, the engine, and the underpinnings in Detroit, and then they would put it on a boat, ship it across the Atlantic, and let a bunch of passionate Italian craftsmen hammer out the bodywork over wooden bucks while chain-smoking unfiltered cigarettes. When the 1954 Plymouth Explorer finally rolled out of the Ghia workshops, it was an absolute showstopper. It was breathtaking. The Italians had draped Exner's vision in the hand-formed aluminum body, painted in the spectacular metallic green. It stood only 54 inches tall. For context, that meant K.T. Keller's beloved fedora would have been instantly crushed into a pancake if he tried to sit in it. It had sleek, flowing lines, dipped doors, and exhaust pipes that were smoothly integrated into the rear bodywork. Inside, it featured luxurious white leather bucket seats, a matching set of custom-fitted leather luggage tucked behind the seats, and an instrument panel that looked like it belonged in a high-end luxury yacht. It was exotic, it was low-slung, and it looked like it belonged parked in a casino in Monaco, not a grocery store in Ohio. But here is where the Plymouth Explorer becomes the greatest practical joke in automotive history. You see, while Ghia was busy dressing the car in a bespoke Italian tuxedo, the engineers back in Detroit had sent over the most underwhelming mechanical guts imaginable. Underneath that gorgeous, sweeping $1 million aluminum hood sat a 230 cubic inch Plymouth Flathead inline-six. This engine was a relic, It was an ancient wheezing chunk of cast iron that produced a blistering, pant-wetting 110 horsepower. Let me put that into perspective for you. Today, there are high-end lawnmowers that could take this car in a drag race. And it gets better. To harness those 110 wild, untamed Italian-American horses, Chrysler equipped the Explorer with their high-drive transmission. High-drive was essentially a standard 3-speed manual bolted to a torque converter. It was heavy, it was sluggish, and it required you to use a clutch to put the car into gear, but then you could technically just leave it in high gear and let the torque converter do the slipping. It was the worst of both worlds. So what you had with the Plymouth Explorer was a car that looked like a Ferrari, but drove like a city bus full of bowling balls. It was the ultimate automotive catfish. If you revved the engine at a stoplight, the car didn't roar, it just sort of cleared its throat politely and asked for a lozenge. Because of this hilarious disconnect between its exotic looks and its geriatric drivetrain, you might be wondering who actually drove the Plymouth Explorer. Did a dashing secret agent use it to escape from Soviet spies along the winding roads of the Alps? Did a famous Hollywood actor buy it to impress starlets? Absolutely not. The Plymouth Explorer was a concept car, meaning its primary job was to sit perfectly still on a rotating carpet at auto shows, while beautiful models in sequined evening gowns stood next to it and pointed at the headlights. Its drivers were mostly terrified Chrysler employees, tasked with moving the car from a loading dock into a convention center at 3 miles per hour, praying to God they didn't scratch the hand-painted aluminum body. It went on a nationwide tour, debuting at the New York Auto Show and traveling to dealerships across the country to make people stop thinking of Plymouths as mobile retirement homes. And it worked. The public absolutely lost their minds over the Explorer. They flocked to see this metallic green spaceship. It achieved exactly what Virgil Exner wanted. It proved that the American public was hungry for lower, wider, and sleeker cars. The DNA of the Explorer eventually trickled down into Chrysler's production cars, leading to the massive tail fins and jet-age designs of the late 1950s that made Chrysler the undisputed king of styling for a brief, glorious period. The Explorer had done its job. It was a hero. But the life of a 1950s concept car was usually a tragic one. Back then, automakers built these dream cars overseas to save money, but they brought them into the U.S. on temporary customs bonds. If they kept the cars in the U.S. permanently, they would have to pay a massive import tax on the estimated value of a hand-built, one-of-a-kind vehicle. To avoid paying the tax, automakers usually did the most heartbreaking thing imaginable. They took these priceless handcrafted works of art to a scrapyard and crushed them into cubes. It was a corporate execution. Miraculously, the Plymouth Explorer managed to dodge the executioner. No one is entirely sure how it slipped through the corporate cracks. Perhaps a Chrysler executive fell in love with it and conveniently lost the paperwork. Perhaps it was quietly sold out the back door to someone who promised to hide it. Whatever the case, the Explorer survived. For decades, it lived a secret life. At some point, someone inexplicably decided to paint this beautiful metallic green car a depressing shade of brown, probably to blend in with the 1970s. It bounced around between private collectors, heavy, gorgeous, underpowered ghost of the 1950s. Eventually, the car was discovered by people who recognized its immense historical value. It was purchased, saved from obscurity, and treated to a meticulous cost-no-object restoration that brought it back to its original 1954 glory. They stripped away the terrible brown paint, repainted it in that stunning, vibrant metallic green, re-stitched the white leather interior, and polished every piece of bespoke Italian trim. Today, the 1954 Plymouth Explorer lives a life of absolute luxury. It resides in the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, sitting under warm spotlights, being admired by thousands of people every year. It never has to worry about K.T. Keller's fedoras, and thankfully it rarely ever has to rely on its 110 horsepower engine to get anywhere. It is a monument to the moment when one of America's most boring car companies decided to buy an expensive Italian suit, suck in its gut, and strut down the runway. And honestly, we are all the better for it.